Hi, everyone. We're just going to give people a few minutes to join us, but just want to say welcome to those of you who have joined us already. And we'll get started in a minute or two once people have joined. Okay, maybe we can make a start and we can get through introductions. And if people are still joining, then they can catch up with us. They won't have missed too much. So, hi, everyone. Welcome to the webinar. I'm Dr. Helen Traill from the University of Glasgow, where I'm a lecturer in political economy and sustainability, and I am chairing the webinar today. You will not need to listen to me talking too much, but I have done some work on community food and sustainability, so I'm really thrilled to be here to learn from some of my excellent colleagues across food studies. So today we'll be talking about interdisciplinary perspectives on food and sustainability. And this webinar has actually been organised by the Bloomsbury Food Library, which is a digital resource offering the widest ranging existing collection of food studies content. So the way today's webinar is going to work is that we're going to have a quick round of introductions from each of our speakers in the order that they're going to present in. And then each of them is going to present for 10 to 15 minutes. And they will share their slides with us, and we'll get to hear a lot more about their work. Then we'll have a Q&A based on questions that have already been submitted. We've had some really good questions submitted, but we did have over 100 sent in. So we won't be able to answer any and all of your burning questions, but we will do our best to cover as much ground as we can within the space of the session today. So without much further ado, I'm going to pass over to our speakers to introduce themselves. We'll go to Megan Blake first, then to Molly Anderson, and then to Rebecca Sandover. So let's hand over to you, Megan.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming today. My name is Megan Blake. I'm a senior lecturer in human geography at the University of Sheffield. And my work focuses mainly around community food and food insecurity. And I'm going to talk to you about a framework that I've developed today.
I think I'm up next. I'm Molly Anderson, and really appreciate folks making time to join the webinar today. I am a professor emerita at Middlebury College in Middlebury, Vermont, and I recently joined the faculty at the University of Vermont as a research associate professor so that I could work with the Institute for Agroecology, which is a really amazing group of people. And I will be talking about transdisciplinarity, trying to go a step beyond interdisciplinarity. But I think it's an approach that's used by my fellow panelists too. Thank you. Why don't you take it over, Rebecca?
Thanks very much, Molly. Yeah, hi everyone. My name's Dr. Rebecca Sandover. I'm a senior lecturer in human geography at the University of Exeter. So I work very closely with the food movement in the UK, and I sort of take a knowledge co-production approach to research and take an engaged research approach. So I'm really interested in sort of sustainable food in general and take a place-based approach to exploring it. In addition to that, I'm also interested in questions around public participation in environmental governance. And I've got a project that I'm running at Exeter called the Governing Sustainable Futures Project, which is looking at knowledge contestation and environmental governance. But I'm very much going to focus on place-based food networks today and questions around food justice. Thank you.
That's brilliant. Thanks, guys. It's a really interesting range of expertise today. So let's kick off the presentations. Megan, would you like to share your screen and take the floor?
All right. Hello. Thank you, everybody. Please bear with me. I'm not great at technology. So thank you very much. It's really a pleasure to be here today. As I said already, my name is Megan Blake, and in the next 10 minutes or so, I'd like to share the food ladders framework that I've been developing over the last probably 15 years now. It takes a more than food approach, which is very interdisciplinary or multidisciplinary, to look at how we can move beyond simply feeding people to creating the conditions that our communities can flourish within. Sorry, there we go. I developed the food ladders framework as a way to visualize the journey from food insecurity to empowerment. And so I'm just going to kind of quickly walk you through it with this slide. The first rung on the ladder is catching. This is about vital crisis prevention and emergency support that catches people in the moment of need, sort of like free food parcels or things like interventions like that. Moving along, in the second rung, we have capacity building, which is where we focus on developing skills, knowledge, and social networks that help people to have the capability to be food secure, to live their best lives. This could be through community cooking classes or food clubs that help people access new and healthier foods. Finally, the last rung is transforming. This is where we see real systemic change led by the community itself. Things like community-owned markets or cooperatives that create local jobs or community growing schemes are really great examples. Moving away from kind of the traditional trap of how we access food to create new ways of accessing and making food available, answering that question, how do we have the food that we need? Holding it all together, holding the whole ladder together are the rails. And I oftentimes tend to forget to talk about the rails because I get focused on the rungs. But the rails are as important. Without the rails, you just have a pile of boards. The rails represent the crucial collaborations with local government, policy councils, and funders that provide the structure and support to help people and communities progress. It also includes those networks of people who work together across different areas to try to give support to what's happening on the rungs. While this approach has been focused on people who struggle, the ladders itself, the ladders sit in a wider context. Their disability is determined by the ground that they sit on, and this needs to be firm. So the ladders is just one tool in the toolbox for building a better food future. We need other tools as well, such as adequate housing and transportation systems, fair and socially just agricultural policy, global stability, and so forth. So the reason, or the kind of key motivation for developing this framework, was in seeing how traditional approaches were falling short, to visiting community settings and seeing people not getting out but remaining trapped in a condition of precarity and vulnerability. And one of the things that seemed apparent was that these traditional approaches tended to focus on narrowly on caloric intake, treating food insecurity as an individual's problem rather than seeing it in its wider social context, social, political, economic contexts. As a result, they often provide only temporary relief, failing to build sustainable pathways out of food insecurity or recognize the damage done to our social fabric, which undermines resilience. So I wanted something different. And I also, a lot of my research ended up in places where people were doing really fantastic things. And I wanted to also bring that to the fore. So the food ladders framework idea encourages what I call a more than food understanding. It's based on the idea that food can be a powerful tool for community building. What we've seen is that when we focus on creating thriving food environments, we also build strengthened social networks, create vibrant community spaces, and foster shared values like inclusion and environmental stewardship. As the image says, sharing is growing. For those of you interested in the theory behind all of this, when developing the work, I drew on a couple of key foundations in addition to sort of resilience theory. I find that theories of practice are very useful as they help us see food habits as socially and culturally situated activities, pushing us toward community level solutions. I also draw heavily on the capabilities approach developed by thinkers like Sen and Nussbaum. This emphasizes a person's agency, considers poverty beyond just the lack of money, but to be a lack of freedom to achieve well-being. And it suggests our goal should be to remove barriers, not just to provide handouts. In practice, we see that the framework, the food ladders framework, operates as an integrated ecosystem. What we've learned is that it's not just a rigid ladder people climb alone. It's about weaving together key elements, building on existing community roots, providing accessible place-based services, creating opportunities and skills that knit together with network support and a good cultural fit. So it's much more integrated and holistic and much more of a system and a systems perspective. The outcome of this much more holistic approach is that it creates these wonderful cascading benefits across multiple dimensions of sustainability. We see measurable improvements in health and well-being, really measurable improvements. And this helps foster economic resilience at the household scale, but also at the community scale. And it strengthens social cohesion, which is important because if you don't have somebody you can rely on in times of stress and struggle, being alone on the sea is not a very safe place to be. Being together is always stronger. It can also promote, this approach can also promote environmental stewardship because it encourages people to be able to express those values, which they're often excluded from in a more commercial setting. Often we're told we have to buy our way into environmental stewardship by buying different food, often which is out of the reach for many of those in hard-pressed communities. I'm really proud of the real-world impact that this food ladders approach is having. And it's all really thanks to the incredible work of communities who have been putting these ideas into practice. Together, we've seen communities secure well over $6 million in funding using the framework. There's been a 454% increase in the UK alone in dignified food support through food clubs, moving away from the traditional charity model. Not to mention all the social eating and community growing and cook-alongs and all the other ways in which people engage and support each other with food. And it's been so gratifying to see the multiple local authorities who've adopted the approach to try to help and support local places to build ladders and to make sure that all the rungs are in place. The approach is also influencing national policy, which is really satisfying, with the Department of Work and Pensions Resilience, Crisis Resilience Fund being the latest example, and of course DEFRA's work on the new food strategy. For those of you outside the UK, DWP is the Department for Work and Pensions, and DEFRA is the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs. And they're responsible for making sure that we all have the food we need to live our best lives. So to conclude, what I hope the Food Ladders framework shows is that it's a holistic community-based approach, and it's about so much more than what's just on people's plates. It's about creating the conditions for our communities to truly flourish. I'm always really keen to see how these ideas can be adapted and used, so I'd love to allow or offer out a question for those of you who are watching. How might this framework be adapted to challenges in your own communities? I'd love to hear back from you. My contact details are there. There's also an example of a paper that talks about the food ladders and has some of that original framing. There's also the very last link there on framework resources includes a whole host of resources available for those who want to try to develop food ladders in the places where they are, practical as well as more conceptual. And given that it's about 10 minutes, I think I will end there. I'm rarely spot on time, so I'm feeling pretty proud of myself. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Megan. Your timing was impeccable. And it's always great and so interesting to hear about food ladders and moving beyond a kind of narrow vision of food out to something a bit more encompassing and many levered, and to really think about what's possible through food support. We'll now pass on to Molly Anderson. The floor is yours, Molly.
Thank you, Helen. Let me just share my presentation. And I appreciated Megan's presentation also. I'm not sure if you have seen the latest report from the high-level panel of experts of the Committee on World Food Security, but it's focused on resilience and resilience in promoting food security and nutrition. And it reinforces many of the messages that you have found in your own work, that it's a community approach, that it goes far beyond just providing calories, and that there are many ways that communities can help to build their own resilience. So as I mentioned, I'm going to be talking mainly about transdisciplinarity, which is a little bit of a step beyond interdisciplinarity. Throughout my professional career, which now stretches 30 years, I've been hearing about the need for interdisciplinarity. But in the institutions of higher education where I've worked, interdisciplinarity in practice is much harder to achieve. The faculty tend to be siloed. They don't get incentives to work together on research or on papers. So you really have to create those interdisciplinary bridges yourself. But I think they're essential. And I believe furthermore that transdisciplinary approaches are essential. Let me see if I can get this to advance. Doesn't want to advance. Well, here we go. Just an example of some of the recent work on interdisciplinarity. This is a paper that just came out in Sustainability Science, where the authors were trying to create a typology of the kinds of interdisciplinary collaborations that exist. And you'll see something similar for transdisciplinarity. Hopefully I'm not going to have trouble advancing every time. No, that went right ahead. So what I mean by transdisciplinarity is, in fact, it wants to go beyond, is the inclusion of social actors beyond academics, such as members of non-governmental organizations, government policymakers, in research and educational projects that are focused on societal challenges. The benefits of including this wider range of people who come from so many different perspectives is that they can offer better solutions. The best solutions come from people dealing with those problems on the ground. Having a transdisciplinary approach integrates the best available knowledge. If it's working well, it's not always easy to do. It reconciles different values and preferences across the group of people who are collaborating and enables mutual learning. So I'm learning from the policymakers about the barriers, the intransigent barriers that they're experiencing. I'm learning from the community members and from NGOs more about the problems that they are trying to solve. And also it creates ownership, both for the problems and for the solutions among the people who need to implement the solutions. And then for educational purposes, it introduces students to the diversity of actors with which they will need to work. So here's a diagram of what transdisciplinarity looks like in action. It begins with identification of boundary concepts that are going outside an individual discipline or a group of academic disciplines, and development of a theoretical framework. And then working with the group of people that you've assembled, it involves exchanging on different research designs, methods, and findings. So people coming from different perspectives will have very different ways of conducting research. I found a really fascinating book recently about Indigenous research that was useful for expanding my own view of what research is and what it should be providing. And people coming from different sources have very different preferences for methods, which means number 3 in this scheme of designing survey questionnaires is a little puzzling, because survey questionnaires are really just one methodology. You might have qualitative findings, you might have interviews, you might have photo voice projects, but you need to integrate all these different things and then synthesize them in the final step and access policy options. So this was a paper that came out also in Sustainability Science, but it was good at mentioning why transdisciplinary research is essential. Okay, now it doesn't want to advance again, but I'm sure it will eventually. Sorry for the delays. It's just not cooperating. Usually I've found that if I touch the screen, that seems to advance. Okay, that went ahead. So let's go on to the barriers to transdisciplinarity and the reasons why people aren't always using it. First, the time that's needed to coordinate, to collect the right participants, people who are willing to work together in this way. It takes extra time to pull these people together, to identify them, pull them together, and then have them actually work together. So it's going to be harder than a single discipline project or an interdisciplinary project where at least all the people who are involved are familiar with academic standards. We also find that not everybody talks in the same language. There's discipline-specific terminology and concepts, and additionally, different concepts and terminology coming from people outside academic disciplines. There are also specific expectations for advancement in institutions of higher education, which sometimes preclude working with communities, working with people outside academic institutions, which means, especially for beginning researchers, this kind of research can seem really risky. Extra time, extra risks, maybe it's not contributing to your research portfolio in the way that something published in Nature or Science would be contributing. So it's a little bit risky. And there can be difficulty securing funding, although some funding agencies really want people to be doing community-based research and working with people outside the academia. Moving forward, and I think I figured how to get around that issue of moving forward through my presentation. Climate change, obviously, is our most urgent unsolved socio-ecological problem. The regions are multitudinous, but some of the big ones are the failure of corporations and governments to deal in responsible ways with climate change. And coming from the United States, I don't have any hesitation in pointing a finger at my own government, which is contributing massively to greenhouse gas emissions, yet withdrew from the Paris Agreement. Solutions are frequently obscured by false narratives that are put forward by these corporations and sometimes by government actors. So it's hard to know the right way forward, like carbon sequestration and storage. We don't have a good way to sequester carbon and store it. Yet people keep talking about that as if it's a real solution. In fact, the IPCC assumes that we will find a way to do carbon sequestration and storage, and they've based their forecasts on the assumption that we'll be able to do that. Climate change is exacerbated by increasing militarization all over the world and the failure to report the impacts of militarization. Global military spending hit a record $2.7 trillion in 2024, the sharpest increase since the Cold War, the sharpest annual increase. And the United States contributes 37% of world military spending. That was 2024 figures. It's really hard to track global emissions from military spending, partly because they're not required to be reported in any country or by any global institution. Still, the total military carbon footprint was estimated at about 5.5% of global emissions in 2019, excluding greenhouse gases from actually fighting war and from post-conflict reconstruction, which adds a lot more. So military carbon footprint is more than the combined contribution of civilian aviation or shipping. And in addition to emissions, the environmental costs of war include degradation of agricultural land and infrastructure. We saw that with the IDF bombing seed banks in Gaza, destroying the future of people who want to plant traditional seeds. And I'm spending a little bit of extra time on militarization because I think it's not well understood that that's not just a problem for peace, but also a massive environmental problem. Fossil fuel emissions from agri-food systems are another major system issue that's really hard to solve. I work with a group called the International Panel of Experts on Sustainable Food Systems, and we just published a report called Fuel to Fork that's about all the ways that the food system depends on fossil fuels. Great report, and I say this without taking a lot of credit. A number of people contributed, just as we always have a large number of people who are contributing to IPAS food reports. You can find that report at ipas-food.org, and you can find a lot of other interesting reports on agriculture and food systems. So what I'm saying through all this is that we desperately need fresh, clear thinking, not only to decrease militarization, to debunk the false narratives, to demand accountability from corporations and governments, but also to take fossil fuels out of our food systems. Ooh, I thought. Okay, let me end up here with applications of transdisciplinarity to climate change curricula, which is the topic of our webinar today. Transdisciplinarity is the leading way to deal with complexity, conflicting solutions, conflicting narratives. It's required to discuss adaptation, mitigation, and resilience in ways that practitioners can actually support and be willing to go along with the results from these negotiations. It's a way to engage better with students because we're bringing in policymakers and people dealing with the impacts of climate change, people advocating for and financing potential solutions, as well as the people who are off on their false solutions. And it also prepares students to assume roles in addressing climate change. And that's what we want to be doing in sustainability curricula overall, is making sure that our students are prepared to actually deal with the problems that we see. So thank you very much. And I will turn things over to Rebecca and stop sharing my screen.
Thank you, Molly. Really interesting to hear all this work you've been doing around transdisciplinarity, and interesting actually to see you talk about the kind of the different silos across academia. It's one of the big kind of chunk of questions we were asked that you've actually already answered, which is great. We'll hand over to Rebecca now. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to share my screen. Great. So hopefully you can see that okay. So yeah, I'm very happy to, it's great to follow those great presentations. And I think you'll find there's quite a lot of synergies with my talk as well between the other two. So I'm going to focus on sustainable food matters and place-based actions towards just and sustainable food systems. Oh, yeah, they do hide. Okay. So, sorry, I'm struggling with it now. How do you go back there? Just to give you an overview, I'm going to sort of start off looking at systemic food issues and then sort of drill down to look at the role of food partnerships and what sort of action is taking place at a place-based scale. And as an example of that, I'm going to sort of focus on food justice and explore some innovative approaches to exploring food aid, and including sort of like the question around what is real food and how to increase access to real food for all consumers. Okay, so this slide just takes a very broad brush issue looking at the systemic issues and the challenges that we're facing. So as many of us, we rely on sort of agri-industrial food supply chains, which are sort of the basis of our supermarket models. And this means that food is shipped around the world in a just-in-time supply model. And this creates multiple impacts for ourselves and the planet, including degraded land, watercourses, etc. So as this slide highlights, emissions from the UK farms is responsible for 11% of UK greenhouse gas emissions. And these agri-industrial supply chains lead to a sort of a disconnect between producers and consumers. And consumers, this sort of issue of disconnection results in us as consumers having limited knowledge about our food and where it comes from. And there's a link here as well with these sort of just-in-time supply models and for the supply of sort of low-value, high-calorie food. And linked as well is the rise of household food insecurity, which I will explore further. So this slide highlights that the conventional food system in the UK, we tend to buy food from 8 stores. So 93% of the food that we buy in our grocery market share is from 8 stores, with the top 6 accounting for 82%. So being disconnected from how our food is produced has impacts on the environment and on our health. And I'm going to explore some of these issues. So in parallel to these sort of environmental challenges, there's been a parallel increase in the rise of household food insecurity in the UK. And this graph from the Trussell Trust highlights that emergency food provision in the UK remains at extraordinary high levels, with close to 3 million parcels being shared in 2024 to 25. So the provision has risen sharply over the last 5 years, and food banks are struggling to keep up with the need in their communities. And in many cases, local authorities are struggling with limited budgets and are looking to cut back on provisions, making it more difficult for people to access referrals. So this issue of food insecurity is one of food justice as well. There's histories of There's histories of neoliberal economics, which has created structural failings and leading to sort of challenges with inadequate welfare payments, insecure employment, and health issues, which underpin these household food insecurity issues. And one thing I'm particularly interested is the question of quality within food aid provision. So food actors and food campaigners sort of campaign for sustainable and healthy food for all. And so I think it's really interesting to see a rise in action towards the provision of sort of fresh food in the food aid models. So just taking a step back to look at some of the sort of literatures around these issues. So there's been a rise of alternative food networks in the wake of food scares in the 2000s. And these food networks can act as a counterbalance to the issues we're exploring here, including the supply of local food, local and sustainable food. And this links to the rise of civic food networks. So Marsden et al. Point to the relationship of trust between consumers and producers, providing the conduit through the expansion of the alternative food network market. And this really is based on the question of trust and turn towards quality for consumers. Nisi et al. Take these individual concerns further to examine an ethics of care throughout these retail relationships. And they point to this model of care, sort of extending beyond ourselves and considering a care for local economies and the environments and future generations. So I argue that a consideration of an ethics of care and food justice is essential for within food geographies and across retail models, and also the food aid sector, as the food movement's goal is sustainable food for all. So I think what's really interesting and gives us elements of hope, and again, it draws on some of the points raised by the other speakers, is how sort of place-based food networks are coming together to address some of these issues. So Routledge 2003 talks about associational politics that constitute a diverse, contested coalition of space-specific social movements. So examples of these associations include some that I've got here on the screen: the Milan Urban Food Policy Pact, the C40 Cities, La Via Campesina, and the Sustainable Food Places Network in the UK. So we've had a history of a food policy vacuum in England, and in a time of social, environment and economic crisis, the need for place-based policy organisations to collaborate and work towards change in policies and programmes has never been more important. So as this slide highlights, place-based food organisations are often made up of innovators, local people with a passion for biodiverse landscapes and sustainable and accessible food for all. So such place-based food organisations are coordinated at a range of scales, including nationally, such as the Sustainable Food Places Network. So these interconnected networks connect as increasingly important mechanism to link food actors, community-based organisations and policymakers in addressing the critical food issues faced by those in our communities. So I'm now going to focus on an example of a food partnership, which I'm very familiar with. So the Devon Food Partnership was established in 2021. And I'd like to, just let you know, I'm on the steering committee of the Devon Food Partnership. So the partnership works in sort of partnership with Devon County Council. So Devon County Council hosts the partnership, but it very much is an independent partnership made up of actors representing the breadth of the food system. We've got farmers, charitable organisations, public health bodies, academics, and a whole range of people sort of interested in the food system coming together to work on these issues in Devon. So some of our early work worked towards the launch of our sort of 2023 Good Food Strategy, and there have been yearly updates since then. But also we've worked towards creating working groups so that we can focus on very specific issues. And I think this sort of speaks back to some of the points that Molly was making, that, you know, we're sort of trying, you know, academics working in collaboration with community organizations and sort of trying to take a practical approach to addressing some of these issues. So the three working groups are the local food economy group, the food insecurity group, and the school food working group. So I'm just going to focus for a moment on the food insecurity working group of the Devon Food Partnership, which again I'm involved with. So the working group comes together with regular meetings, and we sort of on a yearly basis we work towards specific events or briefings or sort of knowledge gathering processes. So it really works as an effective knowledge gathering or a knowledge co-production forum on food insecurity in Devon, with ongoing peer learning and evidence gathering. So some of the activities we've been involved with have been setting up the Devon Food Insecurity Summit in May 2023. And this was the summit, the rationale for the summit was that there had been some ongoing community-based research going on in Devon, led by Devon Community Foundation, on the state of play of food insecurity across Devon and within specific places within Devon. So the summit was an ideal opportunity to bring this knowledge together and to share with a range of important actors, including sort of other community organisations. So it goes to show that there's a range of actors coming together, working on specific issues and working collaboratively. This is just an image from that summit from 2023. And there was a real buzz in the room of people getting quite fired up and wanting to take strong action to move forward. Obviously, we are limited on what actions we can take. So despite the challenges that we've been highlighting in the webinar, food can act as a socializing force and a vital lever for change. And sort of collective action is taking place across many communities. So I'm going to skip on slightly because I know, with the benefit of time, and I know we've got so this is just highlighting a paradigm by Julian Ageman of just sustainabilities, which I think is really important when we think about environmental justice. But I'm just going to skip forward a little bit because I just want to highlight the sort of issues around the changing models of food aid. So I'm sure many of you will be very aware of this sort of food distribution networks led by Fair Share, where I've got here 56,000 tonnes of food was redistributed from supermarkets to community organisations. And some of this food is often moving towards social supermarkets, which are running opportunities for people to take sort of more dignified approaches to accessing low-cost food. So I've worked in partnership with some organisations in the Southwest to consider the issue of access to real food. So I was involved with a conference in 2024 that was thinking about sort of nutritionally dense food and sort of people's access to nutritionally dense food. And it led to the conversations I had with participants sort of planning for the conference session, led to a consideration of what to call nutritionally dense food, because obviously that's not a very accessible term. So based on conversations, we ended up talking about real food and sort of increasing access to real food. I mean, I don't think any one term is the perfect term here, but real food here, we're talking about fresh, local, sustainable food. And there's a number of organisations that I've come across that are increasingly using access to sustainable, local, or we can call it real food, in their sort of informal food aid models. And I've just got a couple of examples to share with you before beginning to wrap up. So Love Food CIC is a fantastic food hub in Exeter, running lunch clubs, cooking workshops, foraging walk-alongs, and also hosting a community food fridge. So they get food from a range of sources, including Fair Share, but also from local sustainable food producer Shillingford Organics, and also from Exeter Food Action. So through these means, there's like low cost or no cost access to high quality sustainable food. And I've got two more examples to share with you. Sorry, I'm just going to watch time a bit. So the Food Forest Project in Somerset, again, is growing food specifically on their community farm to share in local food bank sort of food parcels. So it's involving skilling up volunteers and sharing skills, inviting people onto their land in order to sort of share their skills and to provide really close access to high quality sustainable food. And they've also been focused on providing a cookbook and doing demonstrations of cooking in order to sort of like try and take the sort of scary elements away from cooking from scratch, because that can be quite important. And my last example here, which I think is really inspiring, and in fact, it's inspired us in Exeter to see if we can replicate this model. Cardiff Farmers Market, they've worked with Sustain and Food Sense Wales and others on creating a Planet card, which is a subsidised farmers market card to enable customers who have the card to have 11, it's preloaded with £11 that can be spent at the local farmers markets in Cardiff. So these case studies are operating at a community scale, and they're well connected with local and regional partnerships. But I know I'm going to skip along because I know I'm running out of time. So just to wrap up, I think there's a lot of potential of food partnerships to take a community-based approach to addressing some of the issues we're talking about, but they can't do them on their own. And there's a challenge again, of food partnerships acting in a slightly siloed way. But I think it's really important that these food partnerships are operating with complex assemblages and trying to sort of join up action from the grassroots to the policy chamber. So I'm going to leave it there, and it's been lovely to talk to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. I really like that your presentation spoke to the two previous ones as well. It sort of draws together to this kind of synthetic moment. And thank you to all the speakers for such great presentations. Important also, I think, in this to hear about all of the collaboration across the different presentations, not just within academia, but also working with NGOs, working with government, policymakers, communities to address both big global problems, but also to do so really locally as well, and moving across those different kind of levels. We're going to move on to the Q&A part of the webinar. We had, as I said, over 100 questions submitted, but we don't have a huge amount of time left. So what I thought we could do is I've pulled out a couple of questions that I think we can all speak to. One of which I think really speaks to this recurrent theme around kind of collaboration, actually, that you all touched on in your presentations. So perhaps we could start with Megan and work through in the order that you presented in. Perhaps you could speak to how you approach research in a way that extends beyond academic readership to support sustainable communities. So how do we do that collaborative stuff?
I could show you my diagram right behind me. I think collaboration is really important, but I think one of the things about it takes a lot of time, and it's not necessarily about being in the community and that becoming a member of the community, because that's not always practicable. But I do think it's really important to go in listening first. I think it's and learning, and to go in humbly as someone who doesn't know the local context, and listen to what people have to say and how they have to say it. Our role as an academic, we have skills and an ability to synthesize, perhaps in ways that have been formally trained, and we can communicate to wider audiences given the authority that we have as academics. So I think it's also important to recognize that we have particular skills and assets that we can lend to those communities, not speaking for them, but helping them to translate what they think and what they want and how they believe, and to help them to think about it as well. We bring those skills to the table. And so that's the thing that I've tried to do when I've engaged with across a whole range of different types of groups of people, whether that's a mums group in a ex-mining village in Yorkshire, or whether that's sitting in a room with people who are deciding funding allocations in London, or whether that's a group of people in a government environment, is to really try to think about what I can bring to the table, and then also and to come as an equal rather than as a better or as somebody who can speak for people.
I really like what Megan said and would agree with all of it. There's a name given to that approach, participatory action research. And the basic idea is that the questions that you explore in research come from the people and not from you or from your own discipline. So you need to find out, well, what is it that concerns these people? What are they grappling with? What barriers are they facing? And make sure that that's where you're focused, and not on something that's coming out of your own head or trying to prove some hypothesis that you're bringing to the community. I'll hand it over to Rebecca.
Thanks, Molly. Yeah, I totally agree with what Molly and Megan have said. And yeah, I would just sort of reiterate it to say, I see myself as working alongside the food movement. I see myself as a friend of the food movement and as a partner within the food movement. And as an academic, I think you can bring certain skills, as Megan was saying. And, you know, there is some element of power you can leverage, which can be useful for your partners as well. But it is absolutely critical to work alongside and to listen, not to impose. I think it's also important to recognise that working in such a way has got challenges for us within higher education, because we're not sort of acting possibly in a traditional sort of science production way, which means we're not sort of conducting research and then producing loads of papers. So I think it's important, this collaboration, this engagement, this working alongside takes time, and that needs to be valued by our higher education institutions as well, because it leads to civic university collaborations, which are highly valuable.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we have time for maybe one more question that maybe we could all quickly speak to, not to put too much pressure on you to give us sound bites. But I really like this question that was submitted around hope. So the question that was submitted was, how do we help our students and ourselves move towards hope when thinking about food systems change? And actually, I feel quite hopeful having listened to all of your work and all of this amazing kind of transdisciplinary and interdisciplinary collaborative work. Perhaps just for ease, we go around in the same order again, not to put too much pressure on you, Megan.
I love that question. And actually, I do feel really hopeful. And part of the reason why I do is because in this whole way of thinking, within practice theory and within the kind of way of seeing the world, it's based on a kind of design and the notion that we designed this system. We made it the way it is. And if we could make it one way, we can make it another. And so for me, that gives me an enormous amount of hope. It's not hopeless. It's not something inevitable that we just have to live with, but we can redesign it. So I'll pass over to you, Molly.
Well, what I keep thinking is the mess that we're in right now, we created that mess through sometimes inadvertent decisions. We didn't understand the full consequences, but we're in this mess because of our actions, and our actions can get us out of that mess. So we can't give in to hopelessness, especially as educators, because that's a really bad message to instill in students that it's hopeless. Students give me a lot of hope because they have energy, they have new ideas. They're coming at me all the time with questions that force me to rethink things. I'll hand it over to Rebecca.
Thank you. Yes, I also see a lot of hope. And I think that's why I really love working in this area because, when I'm engaging with partners, I'm sort of coming across really passionate people who inspire me all the time. And on a flip side, as an educator, I'm in a position where I can take students out to meet some of these people doing really fantastic projects, perhaps growing beautiful organic vegetables or things like that. So I think there is definitely hope, and I'm hoping that that translates to the students. And I also see within higher education there is a move towards supporting co-production, civic university engagement. And also within sort of the Research Council's funding, there's also a move towards supporting and co-production. So there is, I think, perhaps what we might call a participatory wave that is also hopeful.
Thank you. And that was actually really nice and succinct from all of you as well, which is wonderful. I think it's really nice to end on this kind of note of kind of hope and collaboration, actually, particularly given how bleak the world sometimes feels at the moment, with what's going on politically, globally. And thank you so much for sharing with us these kind of rich ideas about possible food futures that we can hopefully take forward. I think it's interesting to think sometimes. I mean, I think this is an interesting question, so of course I'll say this, but I think it's interesting to think about what as academics, as educators, as collaborators, as listeners that we can do to support bringing those food futures into the world with us, and what we might need to support further within the universities to do that. So I think that's all we have time for today. So once we end the webinar, attendees will have the option to complete a form requesting a free trial of the Bloomsbury Food Library and their resources, and to provide any feedback that you have. But thank you for everybody who submitted questions in advance. I'm sorry we did not get through as many of them as we would have liked to. We could have been here for a whole extra hour discussing all of the different topics that came up in there. So thank you to the speakers for your presentations and for your answers and for your the work that you've brought with you today. Thank you to the audience for attending today, both those who are here live and those who are watching the recording after the fact. So we hope that you've enjoyed the webinar and have a wonderful rest of your day. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.